Hello everyone, it's yet another day in the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And obviously, as you can tell from the title and thumbnail, we're going to be talking about Russia and Ukraine, which is something I don't touch upon too much on this channel. Because frankly, I'm not particularly an expert in Russian and Ukrainian politics. And frankly, there's so much propaganda from both sides of this war that actually making an objective statement is probably quite close to impossible. Regardless of that, I'm going to give you my opinion on the whole thing anyway. I'm a bit of a centrist on the whole peace deal thing. I can understand the points pretty much all sides are making. I agree with pretty much everyone that Russia is bad, and there is absolutely no doubt Putin is a dictator, whose power and influence should absolutely be opposed, especially when it's expanding into Europe via taking Ukraine. So I could understand the Ukrainians certainly defending their own land, and I can certainly understand Europe, including the UK, sending support to help them out with it. Was it all about NATO expansion? I've had massive doubts about that since the Tucker Carlson interview, where effectively Putin told him, no, not really, it's more about historical Russian land. Which, well, if that's the casus belli, so be it. I don't see that as reason enough to take the land by force. Realistically, I think this is all just a large geopolitical move. Obviously, Russia did annex Crimea and have annexed it since 2014, and Russia really needs Crimea because despite climate cultists, global warming has not quite allowed Russia to have other warm water ports where they can set out ships all year round. And so to me it's a roundabout way to effectively strengthen the claim and the foothold to keeping on to Crimea for that warm water port. And when it comes to where we're up to with the war at the moment, I keep hearing from both sides that Russia or Ukraine are winning. Typically, if that's happening, I would imagine we're actually at a stalemate, which largely seems to be where we're at. Just taking a quick look at the maps of the front line moving, the Russians have managed to move about 40 kilometres or 25 miles in about a year, which is quite slow going considering this is supposed to be one of the biggest militaries in the world going up against Ukraine. Now, I do understand Ukraine does have an awful lot of European and US support, and so at the end of the day this is why there's a stalemate. And at the end of the day, this is why we saw the whole issue with Trump and JD Vance making the point that we're paying for all this. We don't necessarily want to pay for all this anymore. It's probably about time to have a peace deal. And honestly, I can see the reasoning and argument for that. At the end of the day, a Western victory will be largely seen as, well, Russia's military capacity being cut, which has absolutely happened over the past 3 years. However, at the same time, Ukraine are not going to accept a peace deal where they have to give up their land. And hence we have this impasse. Anyway, with all that said, that is largely my take on the whole situation. Please leave a comment correcting me anywhere or giving me your opinion. As I say, I'm no expert in this, but what I am more of an expert in at the very least is the politics of Great Britain. And this is what this video is mainly about. Keir Starmer seeks coalition of the willing to bring peace to Ukraine. The Prime Minister has told European leaders that they must do the heavy lifting to end the war with Russia, because after this impasse, they have worked out that, in fact, they probably can't trust the US to largely bankroll this war anymore. So the Prime Minister said it was time to act rather than a moment for more talk, as he asked other European nations to commit to spending peacekeeping soldiers to Ukraine, which, just from the very outset, probably not a good idea. We're talking about direct NATO troops, if we're saying that. If it was just the UN, it probably wouldn't be too bad if that's what he means. That's not too bad. But you can't have direct NATO troops in there. That's just a declaration of war. He hosted a meeting at Lancaster House in London in an attempt to salvage peace talks after Zelensky was ordered to leave the White House after an extraordinary clash with President Trump on Friday. Britain and France have agreed to draw up plans for a new peace deal with Ukraine and present them to Trump in an attempt to act as a bridge with the US. In a sign that relations are deteriorating further, senior allies of Trump suggest on Sunday that Zelensky may have to stand aside as leader. Which is another funny thing about this whole situation. Obviously, Ukraine are, like most of Europe, a bit of a vassal of the US. And the Trump administration has effectively let that mask slip. And in a sense, that's kind of reduced their soft power overall because of this. And along with stopping funding of the war, that has effectively meant what we are seeing now has to happen. The Europeans have to pivot to actually upping their actual defence spending so that they can actually be useful should things in the Ukraine turn a bit sour, because they've had the signal loud and clear from the US. It's unlikely they will directly come and help us now. Which is fine if they see Europe's problems as purely European, but this in a way is actually good news for us. There have been calls to up the defence budget for years and years and years, and it's not happened, and Labour have effectively been strong-armed into it. The problem we have with Labour is we don't know how much of that budget is actually going on to useful things, and whether, say, the Mauritius deal is going to count towards defence, because of the crazy things they can do with public spending statistics. Anyway, Macron also said that European countries should raise their defence spending to between 3 and 3.5% of GDP, which is what Donald Trump literally said 5 years earlier, and nobody did it. Well, not nobody, I think the Polish did it. Earlier in the day, Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, said more European countries will ramp up defence spending, but did not go into specifics. Choosing his words carefully, Zelensky also insisted that Ukraine's turbulent relations with the Trump administration were temporary. It will pass, he said. I'd really like President Trump to hear things from me personally, and for me to hear things personally from President Trump. I'd like a more direct dialogue with the president, yes, and I don't think it should be televised this time around. I do think that was a bit of a mistake. You know, I'm talking about from the British perspective here. I completely get that Trump's base did actually quite like seeing and everything being transparent here, but at the end of the day, these are probably conversations best had behind closed doors for now. Lord Mandelson, the UK ambassador to the US, urged the Ukrainian president to sign a new economic deal with Trump as soon as possible in an effort to get talks back on track, because it was the only show in town. He also said that Ukraine should commit to a ceasefire and defy Russia to follow it. This is very interesting, actually, because an awful lot of people have effectively been saying, don't go for any sort of peace, we need to fight and win this. And now we've even got Lord Mandelson, the uber Blairite, effectively saying, no, maybe Trump's actually got a point here. Because at the end of the day, I think what the aim here is to effectively flatter Trump, give him the deal that he wants with the rare earth minerals or whatever, keep him happy so that he keeps up the war and postpones for a few years, while, as we say, Europe starts actually pivoting towards defence spending, so that it actually has forces that it can prepare to, I guess, go to war with Russia on. The main issue they're going to have with that is that you don't just need money for a decent armed forces, you also need a willing populace. I don't exactly think we're going to get that, given recent opinion polling on Generation Z, which at the end of the day is going to be the generation that will probably be hired to fight these wars. Anyway, European world leaders came together in London yesterday, mostly from Europe and including Justin Trudeau from Canada, where Starmer said that we stand with Ukraine, and he and his other European leaders expressed their support. The PM announced a £1.6 billion deal that will allow the Ukraine to purchase 5,000 air defence missiles. Speaking after the meeting, Starmer urged European leaders to do more to support Ukraine. Britain and France were the only European countries to publicly commit to spending peacekeeping troops so far, as long as the US provided security guarantees. Which I think basically means... I think they basically have to do, because they will not be able to have a full-scale war with Russia if they break the peacekeeping terms. Effectively, it's an extra deterrent, but our armies are not strong enough to actually make that deterrent against Russia particularly well. However, he later said a number of countries have agreed into sending troops for a peacekeeping force during the summit, but added that he would leave it up to the individual nations to announce their participation. We're at a crossroads in history today, he said. This is not a moment for more talk, it's a time to act, time to step up and lead, and a time to unite around a new plan for just and enduring peace. And these are words that are typically quite echoed throughout the past century. This is what decent statesmen have done over the past century. And this is how Keir Starmer is now trying to effectively recreate himself. Domestically, he's ruined. He's just too unpopular. People don't want him, both in Labour and outside of Labour. Reformer coming to the top of the polls constantly these days. And yet, when it comes to the international stage, this is where Keir Starmer is really trying to seem like the proper statesman, because you've got to realise most people in the UK, of all ages really, but mostly the boomers, they literally see Putin as the next Hitler. And so you're seeing constant poor analogies with Starmer being the next Churchill and things like that, and it's just completely missing the mark. The war is at a stalemate and has frankly been a tragedy, with millions of lives lost for what is effectively, from my perspective anyway, a power play by Russia. One that, given I was told near the start of the war it'd be over in 3 weeks, we're now 3 years into it, and largely the movements are probably slightly better than World War One, which everyone looking back on it is largely seen as a pointless war. There are World War One comparisons that are much more apt here than World War Two. However, because Putin is seen as Hitler 2.0, any sort of appeasement, all of a sudden you're the weak Neville Chamberlain rather than the big, strong and Chad Churchill. However, not all situations are the same, and I don't think this one is particularly akin to World War Two. As I say, I am completely on board with Ukraine defending its own borders. That makes perfect sense. However, we're at a point where we have to really start thinking, well, how much can you push back? How much longer can you really be in this war? Basically, is it over? However, obviously the international community that to some extent still exists and is trying to assert itself without Donald Trump is never going to accept that, because you have expansionist powers and all of a sudden we're going to have to go back to 19th century politics. Which was a time of constant warfare, and a lot of people want to avoid that. Unfortunately, I think in trying to build a world with nothing but peace, we have made too many concessions with our own domestic policies, and well, frankly, it's just not appeared to be working. Do I want a future like that? No, not particularly. I am just saying things as I see them. Starmer went on to say that a coalition of the willing, a phrase used to describe Allied forces involved in the Iraq War in 2003, was needed to guarantee peace. We are not in a good place if we are trying to riff on the Iraq War of 2003, I want to say that much. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but it can't mean that we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. Britain and France are willing to put boots on the ground and planes in the air to provide an effective deterrent, Starmer said. As he suggested that other European countries were likely to come forward, he added, Europe must do the heavy lifting. Yes, I'm afraid UK and the rest of Europe in my audience, that will largely mean us. I hope you have a long-term illness. It's time to step up and lead to unite around a new plan for a just and enduring peace. If you want to preserve the peace, you have to be prepared to defend the peace. Starmer said that he has a huge amount of common ground with Meloni, as he signalled that Italy will make commitments. He added that Canada has traditionally taken a forward-leading role, and was a reliable ally already experienced in training troops in Ukraine. He said the US must provide security guarantees if the peace plan is to succeed. Trump has refused to offer such assurances publicly, but Starmer suggested that he is open to doing so, highlighting a call with the president on Saturday night, and I imagine this will be put forward even more with the state visit, given how much Trump loves meeting the royal family. Again, like I said in the last video with him going to Trump, he's playing a bit of a masterclass when he is stepping forward as, well, the leader of United Europe and US when it comes to helping defend Ukraine. And as much as I see calls from the online right of, oh, nobody really cares about Ukraine, this is all just, the liberal elite, it's total nonsense. There has certainly been a drop in people who want the war to be extended. However, specifically what Starmer is talking about here is a peacekeeping force. It's okay, we'll have a ceasefire so that we have less lives lost. And if it's successful, it will be a rather popular position. Will it save him in the next election? Well, it will probably stop him from total annihilation. Who knows? We're still 3 years out from it. But I want to make one thing clear to those of you especially who only listen to online right spaces. The position that Putin and Russia have been reasonable here and that nobody really cares about the invasion is total nonsense. Pretty much everyone in the UK thinks that Russia did a bad by doing this invasion, and that Ukraine, frankly, are heroes in and of themselves because they have managed to defend for 3 years against the bear that is Russia. And as I say, I am on side with them defending their own country. Why would they not? And in fact, obviously they've had support from us, but it's still pretty impressive that they've managed to hold the line for this long, and even counterattacked in some instances directly within Russia's borders. This is why it's called a stalemate. I don't know how much closer to a stalemate it could be. And Starmer coming forward and being the man that effectively brokers the peace, that's how he will be seen, and it will make him popular. Especially on the world stage, but at the end of the day, the world stage don't vote him in, do they? Anyway, before this big grand speech, it was revealed that Rachel Reeves unlocks billions from Ukraine and UK defence. The Chancellor calls on European leaders to step up after a row between Trump and Zelensky as the Ukrainian president prepares to meet the king. It's amazing the money they can find for these things, but at the end of the day, I don't think this is the worst thing to spend money on, because we actually do have decent military manufacturing in the UK. So the Chancellor was speaking before a crucial meeting of European leaders that we just went through, including Zelensky in London on Sunday. They find themselves dealing with the fallout from the bad-tempered exchange between both Ukrainian leader and President Trump in the Oval Office that was broadcast around the world on Friday. Zelensky will also meet with the King at Sandringham on Sunday, which he indeed did, and it was a good photo opportunity. However, Reeve said she would change the remit of the £27.8 billion National Wealth Fund so it could be spent on defence. That is probably the best news I've actually heard from the Labour Party since it's been in government. That is actually a good move. It's a shame it's out of such ridiculous necessity, but at least we've got to that point. The Public-Private Investment Fund was previously only used for infrastructure projects, including green energy schemes. The money will be separate from the increase in defence spending announced by Keir Starmer last week, so that's an even better bonus. Something good has come out of all this, it appears. Hopefully it doesn't lead directly to a world war, but to be honest, I don't think that'll happen. Then again, many people didn't think that the Ukraine-Russian war would happen, so there we go. The Chancellor and Ukraine finance ministers have also signed a £2.26 billion bilateral loan agreement. It marks the first time the money from the appreciation of frozen Russian assets in Britain will be used for military purposes. That is actually quite funny, to be fair. And this also appears to be a pattern that we are seeing all over Europe. As shares in European defence companies extended a blistering rally on Monday as investors raised their bets that governments across the continent would boost their military spending. Rheinmetall jumped 18% in Frankfurt, BAE Systems rose 14% in London, and Leonardo climbed 15% in Milan. The sector-wide bounce follows Sunday's summit with the European leaders in London that we just went through, and multiple leaders have called for a boost in defence spending after the Trump administration refused to offer US security guarantees. So I would like to personally thank America, I suppose, for putting Europe in the position where they actually have to think about their own countries for once. The knock-on effects could be incredible. This is weakening your power on the world stage, but at the end of the day, that's effectively what you'd vote Trump for anyway, America first. So Europe's going to have to look after itself even more now. It's just a shame that it's mostly to focus on the other side of Europe than, our own borders stopping people coming into Kent via dinghy, but there we go. I'll take the good news I can get from all this, that's what I'll say here. Anyway, Starmer's position as being the bridge between, at the very least, Ukraine and the US, or the wider European community and the US, is further evidenced by the fact that ministers stand by the invitation for Trump as Zelensky meets King Charles. There were calls for the written invitation delivered by Starmer to be revoked after the US president's row with the Ukrainian leaders in Washington, which I don't actually think is a particularly popular stance. And I'll go through why as we go through the article. So Trump's visit is going ahead as planned despite calls for it to be reconsidered. Ministers stood by the invitation, which was made by a letter handed to Trump by Sir Keir Starmer and signed, of course, by King Charles himself. There had been calls from the SNP and even senior Conservative a single senior Conservative MP for a change in tact given Trump's treatment of President Zelensky, which everything seems to have turned upside down. You'd expect all this from Labour a few years ago, and yet now the Conservatives are doing it, mainly I think because they are a part of a uni-party. SNP were always going to do this because they hate Trump because he's got Scottish ancestry, frankly, and the Tories are just acting as Labour would, trying to say, oh, actually, think of what he's done to Ukraine, which I get they are trying to reflect what they think is the popular position of the nation, which is kiss the ground that Zelensky walks. I don't think that's quite where we are as a nation. But acting as a statesman to be the bridge to eventually broker peace, that is obviously going to be a good tact here when you are trying to improve your reputation. And as they go through in the article, they need to gain American support for this peace deal because Europe can't do it themselves. What's the best way to do that? Do the opposite of annoy Trump. And that's the thing I really don't think that the pro-Ukrainian side are accepting enough. Zelensky has played an absolute masterclass in irritating Trump. For instance, he went over to America to meet with Kamala Harris when she was the presidential candidate for the Democrat Party and slammed the surrender policy. So, Trump and Zelensky already had quite bad blood before all this. And while Zelensky went over in good faith to try and get on the good side of Trump and his administration, after the 40 minutes of good, amicable talk, the obviously now famous row that they had that was televised everywhere, it's quite plain to see that Zelensky hadn't quite got the message that, well, you're not dealing with the Democrats anymore, who are happy to effectively give you unlimited support, and to an extent you have to find a way to kiss the Trump ring, flatter and charm him so that he will get on your side. You didn't do that very well, and so now you're in the mud. However, luckily you have Keir Starmer on your side, who luckily has the King of England on his side, and who luckily actually seems to be able to get on Trump's good side. You know, I'm a reform activist at the end of the day. I would still prefer reform to be government of the country here, but there's no point kidding myself here. Starmer is doing well on this particular point. This is going to help his popularity. We'll see what happens with the polls, but at the end of the day, I think people are so insular looking at the moment because there are so many problems in Britain. I don't think this is going to make too much of a difference. And I think Reform's talk on all of this is actually quite good and middle of the road, as I say. As Farage's take on the whole thing's rather like mine. The spat in the White House was regrettable and will make Putin feel like the winner, which, given everyone says that Nigel Farage is Putin's puppet, not exactly making that case with this particular tweet, but anyway, this is not the end of the story. A peace deal is essential and Ukraine needs the right security guarantees, and this is largely where I am. I think we're at a point where we just need a ceasefire, at the very least. Otherwise it's just going to be endless meat grinding to move the lines a few miles a year. It's just not worth it. And also, Farage is doing a good job of making sure we all know about the Brexit dividends, because the link between Europe and the USA can be done by Britain now, due to Brexit. It's in a unique position to form a coalition of the willing to secure a lasting peace. Thank goodness we left the EU and this country can stand tall on the world stage once again. Because I largely don't think Farage will be doing too much different to Starmer in terms of the Ukraine at the moment. Because at the end of the day, what Starmer's doing appears to be popular. Obviously, polling might come out and it might seem completely different, but I highly doubt it. Support for continuing the war has certainly shrunk in the UK, but it's still not in the negative. But people do understand that there is probably going to need to be some peace in Ukraine at the moment, and if that's just a ceasefire, so be it. I think most people can agree with that. But Ukraine aren't going to surrender their land, and yet Russia aren't going to stop until they've had that victory. So what do you do at this impasse? Well, best thing is just to have the ceasefire. There's been a ceasefire in Korea for decades at this point. It can be long-lasting. And finally, Rupert Lowe, as usual, is asking decent questions to ministers, especially about these boots on the ground in Ukraine. Where would the troops be deployed? How many? How many is part of the overall mission? How long? All these details that are relatively important for all this, because, not that I remember too well, but under Tony Blair's government with the Iraq War, questions like these just were basically hardly put forward, and it ended up with one of the most unpopular wars we've ever been part of going forward, for reasons people can't really remember. It was something to do with 9/11. Ended up with a massive power vacuum and Iraq in a worse state than when it started. We want to be careful about this time round, and I'm glad we have someone like Rupert Lowe constantly asking questions to this government to make sure that the right approach is actually made. Anyway, I'm going to finish this off with a Twitter clip posted by Keir Starmer himself from this tweet where he just said, "We are at a crossroads in history, it's time to act." And I'll largely mute the thing because it's just frankly heroic music while lines from Keir Starmer's speech are read out intermittently. And we've gone through most of the lines in the article before, but just look at the visuals here. Here we obviously have army personnel in parade dress with your bearskins on. It's been noted obviously by many people there is basically no diversity in this number 10 clip. You've got plenty of the military in parade shots along with basically everyone loving Starmer, or all the world leaders loving Starmer. This is what I mean. He's pivoted to effectively try and be popular via effectively being the peacemaker, which is probably his only chance to not completely destroy the Labour Party. And again, frankly, he just seems to be doing a pretty good job of it. This is good propaganda. I really can't fault it. He is a man of the world, standing tall on the world stage, as Nigel Farage says, and I think Farage is right not to criticise him for it. I think it would be stupid. At the end of the day, it seems that a lot of these people do actually want peace. They just also understand you cannot have peace if it results in Ukraine losing its own lands, because that's the whole point of it fighting its side in this war. And so, as I say, the visuals were just good. It's pretty much exactly the propaganda I would expect from a man who is pivoting to say, I am the peacemaker, I will move this world forward to a new era of peace. And now it's just a question of if he manages it or not. As I say, Ukraine and Russia are at an impasse, and neither will be accepting a long-term peace deal. Hence, we're at a point where, well, we need the ceasefire. And at the end of the day, I think Europe and America mostly got what it wanted. It's going to sound grim, this, but effectively, we've been bankrolling and supporting the Ukraine with our military technology, our tanks, our direct money in some cases. And well, yeah, Ukraine's quite corrupt. Some of it will have randomly gone missing. However, at the end of the day, the point was to hold the line and grind down the Russian military machine. And they did that to the point where they had to get North Korean soldiers over, which to me indicates they were getting quite desperate. So Russia's military capabilities have been sawn down quite a bit by this war. Appetite for support is certainly going down and will probably end up with people agreeing that peace needs to come soon, and in fact I think we're pretty much there already. And so Starmer's taken advantage of this whole thing, and who can blame him for doing it? There's no way he's recovering his popularity via domestic policy because he's not able to actually do what's needed to be done to fix the UK to make it grow, so now he's trying to do it via being a world statesman. The problem he's going to run into down the line is, unless he actually changes the UK's economy to actually be one that can actually grow, he's going to be screwed with his hard power he actually needs to actually support his soft power move here. So while there has been good news sprinkled around here and there, large-scale domestic issues aren't being fixed by this. While he may be more popular on this front, I don't think it's going to particularly help him win another majority. I think we're largely still on the same track here, especially with Farage effectively saying Starmer's doing the right things when it comes to foreign policy here. So you can't really make the excuse that he's Putin's lapdog. Anyway, I think with that, I hope I've informed you pretty well with this. I think I've done well with this commentary anyway. Right, with that, it's shill time. Tonight, we are going to be finishing off the Peloponnesian Wars over on the Worcester Club. Tomorrow, we are doing a stream where we are going through a video by the Adam Smith Institute where they explain effectively how Clement Attlee and successive governments after that killed Birmingham as a industrial powerhouse, and then videos out as and when I can make them. If you want to support the channel, as I say, you can subscribe, like, or leave a comment on this video. They are free ways to do it. Or you can send super thanks or super chats in any video or stream that I do, either here or over on the Worcester Club. And finally, you can become a member if you think I deserve that too. It gives you unlimited access to my back catalogue of streams, so do give a look at that. But with that, it's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.